is the Last Minute Blues Podcast with Jeff Burton, Donnie Fandango, and former Blues defenseman Jamie Rivers. Powered by Together Credit Union, empowering you to achieve your financial goals.
It is the Last Minute Blues Podcast. Donnie Fandango, Jeff Burton, and in for Jamie Rivers, Mr. Alex Ferrario. Alex, what's going on, good sir?
I am back, and I think the last time I was on this podcast, I blew up on social media because everyone thought I said Colton Parayko was the best defenseman in the NHL. So I will temper my thoughts on this one for you today.
You know what's kind of crazy? Over the course of the last few years, in kind of trying to figure out, and this is like kind of sort of serious a bit, and kind of trying to figure out social media for myself so that I don't let it drive me crazy.
Amen.
And in the way that people are just so quick to be so crappy.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I appreciate wanting to make sure we have measured thoughts and but sometimes, man, we're having conversations. And sometimes people take the things that we say out of context and then they just blow them up to try to make us look like we don't know what we're talking about. It's just miserable. It's a miserable way to go about your existence, I feel like.
It's become a platform that people turn it into let's try and shoot down this individual. Mm-hmm. Where there are so many good social media platforms out there that are funny, that have great videos. Like the one that I loved, and this has nothing to do with hockey, but I love that we're starting off this way. John Krasinski, he did that during COVID, the Some Good News, where he did the news platform where he would just come up with news stories. I love that kind of stuff because you're able to just go out there, come up with different fun things, and sometimes people are just freaking hilarious on Twitter. They come up with some great stuff.
Amazing. You're funnier than I am.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then it's you get the other side of it. And I find myself seeing those, and it's usually the same repeating ones that show up. They show up on Blues post games a lot, honestly, Donnie. When I'm on there,
I'm sure they do.
And I want to see stuff. It's when the Blues are playing well, you get the people that come out there and that are like, man, what is wrong with this team? This team's not playing this specifically correctly and that. And then when they start playing poorly, it's a different core of people that come out and say, oh, this team sucks, or I can't believe you think they're this bad. They're actually doing this well. There's this divide in groups of people that have one way or the other, and they're always waiting to pounce.
Yeah, and the thing, I don't, listen, I have really tried over the course of maybe the last 10 years of my life to sort of go into this lane of as educated of a sports fan as I can be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For a while there, the Blues, I had to do that or they would drive me crazy. Same for the Bills, that sort of thing. But I honestly try to go, why?
Yep.
Okay, if it's something I don't understand, if it's a move I don't get, whatever, I really do try to think about, take for instance, the David Perron situation from Doug Armstrong's side, from our fan side. It's obviously different ways to look at things, but you got to do it. And I don't understand why more sports fans don't just try to be a little more plugged in or a little bit more balanced in how they react. And it's crazy for me to talk about anybody being balanced when after the Capitals scored last night to tie it up, I was swearing my face off. But I just feel like people just go to react, and we all know that about social media. But I think while they do it, they make themselves look like jackasses in and of themselves.
It's reactionary. And look, I don't want people to take this the wrong way. I love when people get involved post games. I love that people will question what I think is a good thing or a bad thing because it sparks conversation, and everyone's available to have their own opinions with this stuff. The thing that comes into it that I've learned over the years, and honestly, Chris Kerber has been a very influential person for this for me, rather than jump to a conclusion, let the stats tell the story. And I'll give you a great example, the David Perron situation in the offseason. As much as we didn't understand why they decided to move on from David Perron and his 25-plus goals that he scored and the power play success that he was, you also looked at the numbers and how abysmal the team was defensively pre-Nick Leddy and post-Nick Leddy when they got him, and how things changed. The high-danger scoring chances that they were giving up, the unblocked scoring chances that they were giving up, the turnovers that they were giving up. There was a reason that the Blues went into that offseason and said, David Perron is a great piece for us. but our defense will not be good if we don't have Nick Leddy. And Donnie, think about it. And I know people are still stuck to this. I think Perron had 3 points last night for Detroit, which
of course
everyone tortures herself with former Blues, which I understand that. I do it too. But where do you think this team would be right now, this point of the season, if not for Nick Leddy?
Oh, boy.
You don't have Scandella. You don't have Perunovic. Parayko's out for 2 games, and we don't know what that is. I mean, your top 4 would be Krug, Falk, Nico Mikkola, and Callie Rosen. I mean, are you feeling good about that team right now?
Nah, man, and I think, too, we saw it when Nick Leddy got traded here last year.
Yeah.
It just seemed like it clicked, and it didn't seem like it took much time. It just seemed like that dude and that role was etched out, and he slid right into it, and it just calmed everything else down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I completely see that, but also, too, again, going back to trying to, if you know Doug Armstrong, you know that not very often is he throwing big money and long years at guys that are older. He does not do that. Hello, David Backus.
Yeah, Backus. I mean, look how smart of a decision that was. I mean, and look, I loved David Backus, but
still do.
If you would have signed David Backus, you would have been in a position that you wouldn't have been able to start that transition into the new core of players. Ryan O'Reilly wouldn't be here if you would have signed David Backus, which who knows if you're winning the Stanley Cup. And now, no disrespect to David Backus, but Doug is so good at looking at the landscape of 5 to 10 years from now, rather than there's a lot of general managers that are. Vancouver is a perfect example of a team that's just looking at the here and now. When they made that deal to get Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland from Arizona, what was that, last season?
Yeah.
They basically were saying, we came off of a bubble year in the playoffs where we beat St. Louis. We're trending in the right direction. We've got these young players. We've got these established players. Let's build off of this. And that was very one-dimensional and said, we just need Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland. They got a lot more issues than one defenseman and one goal scorer right now in their top 9, and that's what Doug doesn't do. Doug sits there and says, we could sign David Perron, but then in 3 years from now, when Torrey Krug's older and Justin Falk's older and Colton Parayko's in his prime, and we have to move on from certain players that we couldn't afford to keep, what's our defense look like? Because the minors, they're not very full right now of players who are ready to be NHL players.
Absolutely. I think, too, what's been really fascinating about this Blues franchise to watch since Doug Armstrong has been here is that focus on, like you just said, not just the here and now, but how are we looking in 5? How are we looking in 10? So, I feel like there is now a Blues way of going about business, about how they build the team, much like we grew up here in St. Louis with the Cardinal way, and with the way in which that once Walt Jocketty took that team over and the DeWitts took it over, there was definitely a way about the business. And it feels like the Blues and Doug Armstrong have that exact same sort of thing going on right now. And as a Blues fan, it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like, okay, well, I know what this next core is going to look like, at least somewhat, so it just feels like it's like this sort of thing that's always sort of good.
Yeah.
Because they know what the hell they're doing.
Well, and that's just it too, Donnie. I mean, if you think about the way that Doug Armstrong's got this established, first of all, it comes down to the ownership group, Tom Stillman and his partners. You're not doing this if you don't have an ownership group that's saying, we'll spend to the cap every year. I know these last 3 years have been unpopular because of some of the decisions that Doug Armstrong has made, David Perron being one of them, but you're in a flat cap, and they're still spending to the salary cap.
Yep.
Now you're moving into an area where $4 million gets added onto that salary cap, and even beyond that. So that's where the optimism comes into play with that business plan. Doug Armstrong knows that he can spend to the cap and make a competitive team every season because you've got Tom Stillman. But you can't just be the New York Yankees of the NHL and say, we're just going to throw money at free agents and be good, because that doesn't work all the time. What you need is your core in place. And Doug has been so good. If you go all the way back to the come grow with us era, you remember that era, Donnie. It was not very fun.
No.
Patrick Berglund, TJ Oshie, David Perron, David Backus, that come grow with us era. Then you get to the 2008 November, Thanksgiving actually, November 24th, when they traded for Alexander Steen. Welcome to your new core. Steen, Backus. You've got the older players and the younger players like Alex Pietrangelo that are taking over. Then they make the trade for Jay Bouwmeester to add into that core of players. And then you transition into that Stanley Cup era where you're able to bring in Paul Stastny and kind of add on to those core of players. Yuri Laterra at the time. I know people hear that, But Yori Laterra was a centerman that needed to fill a void for them. Yeah. Then you get to O'Reilly and David Perron and Patrick Maroon. He's always added to the core of players. But what have the core of players always been? It was Oshie and Perron and Berglund and Backus. And then it turned into it was Steen and it was Pietrangelo and it was Perron and it was some of those younger players. Now you're in the era that is Thomas, Kyrou, Parayko, and Falk. Like that and Jordan Binnington. That's your core of players, and now you're adding on to it.
You know, a word that can be misconstrued as a negative thing, but in this particular instance, I'm not looking at it that way. I find when I see the few times that I have seen Doug Armstrong in the press box, when I've been absolutely petrified and walking past him.
Me too, man. I've seen him plenty of times.
But he, to me, looks like a man that knows that he's good at what he does.
Yeah.
And has an ego about that. Who in the organization keeps the general manager's ego from hurting the team? You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying I'm not saying Doug Armstrong has done that, but at all. But what I'm saying is at this point in his stature with the organization, he's wielding a whole heck of a lot of power.
Yeah.
Well, what's to say that he doesn't want to sign X player for an ego reason? Who is the one? Is Tom Stillman the one that says, hey, man, you might not be looking at this the correct way? Who's the one that keeps Doug Armstrong in check?
Man, that is a really good question, Donnie. I don't know if I know the answer to that. Me just spitballing here, Doug Armstrong is in a very interesting situation because of how in-depth the fan base is here in St. Louis. If you look around, there are teams out there, like I'll give you a great example, the New York Islanders with Lou Lamoriello. Lou Lamoriello's got an ego to him because he's been very successful in his career. Last season, nobody had an idea what Lou Lamoriello was doing with the Islanders, and they stunk, and everyone was like, what is he doing? Get rid of this guy. Now look at what they're doing right now. But I think the interesting position that Doug Armstrong is in, I think there's a little of Tom Stillman that keeps him in check, obviously. I'm sure a lot of it is him keeping himself in check because he wants to make sure that this is a Stanley Cup contender. But I wonder if it's all of the people he puts around him. I don't know if people understand how many former players, former front office members, former coaches that Doug has around him as a front office member. Like Al McInnes is one of his right-hand men. He brought in Ken Hitchcock to be a scouting advisor for the team. He's got Peter Chiarelli, a former Boston Bruins general manager, who's with him now. You have Bob Gainey, who is with him also. Like, he's got so many Hall of Fame potential people that are around him. I think those individuals keep him in check. But also you have a ton of alumni around the team, too, that take to heart this St. Louis Blues team. The Al McInneses, the Keith Kachucks. You've got the Kelly Chases that are around, the Brett Halls that are around and in tune. I would imagine that keeps you in check if you're a general manager also, because you got all of this Hall of Fame talent around you, and you want to be up to that potential.
Absolutely so, but then also too, in that group of people that you have surrounded yourself with in your management group are people that you trust their opinion. So if they say, "Hey, man, you're wrong," then that gives you reason to pause. I'm just amazed, or I guess I'm just kind of fascinated by being able to have that sort of power. And like you even alluded to, you got to keep yourself in check,
right?
Because you can let that get away from you real quick.
Well, look at the past. Let's just go back to the past 4 seasons of free agency for Doug Armstrong and the names that have been sitting out there. Like, if you're Doug Armstrong, you go out there and throw all the money you want at Johnny Gaudreau, right? You could trade away pieces and get Johnny Gaudreau, but you got to give yourself a little bit of patience there and understand, like, hey, defense is our biggest issue right now. A couple of years ago, you could have made trades that were sitting out there for teams. Like, you could have been aggressive and gone after Erik Karlsson from the Ottawa Senators and given him the big money. But you didn't, because you kind of knew what kind of player he was. Mm-hmm. It's a really fascinating question, Donnie, and I'm going to keep it in the bank because whenever I get the chance to talk to Doug, I'd be curious. I wonder if he keeps himself in check with this also.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if you're Doug Armstrong, you look at this and you say, I have built something very special here in St. Louis that you just don't want to throw away by getting too overzealous of free agency and sitting there and being like, I got to go out there and get the big prize, and realizing that, no, we need to stick to the plan. And this plan has been set now. You know who your head coach is. Doug Armstrong made that very clear when they were struggling.
Yeah.
Brewery ain't going anywhere. So this is our style. You know who your owner is, that you're spending money to the salary cap every single season, and now you've got pieces that you know are going to be here for 6+ years. Binnington, Falk, Parayko, Kyrou, Thomas. That's your team for the next 6 years. How do you build around it? You put the Buchneviches, you put the Shens, you put the Sods, you put the Nick Leddys, you got the backup goaltenders, and then you draft well. Like, he's got the plan in place, but I wonder if the most important person of keeping him in check is himself. Is
there somebody, and there might not be, but is there someone that he is potentially maybe grooming to take over,
like
that,
a GM,
like as the GM sort of thing?
So Ryan Miller is the guy that is the assistant general manager now for the team. And Ryan Miller, for those that don't know, he was kind of on the analytics side for a while with the team. And so he was promoted, I think it was last year, to Ryan Miller. I actually think he was the salary cap. He was the capologist for Doug Armstrong for a lot of years, of like the one that was managing the salary cap for the team. So Ryan Miller is in that post right now with Doug Armstrong. I would imagine he's being groomed into that role to when the GM spot opens up. Maybe it's available to him. But the thing is, you're not just grooming him for St. Louis. Doug grooms individuals for NHL. Like Marty Brodeur is a perfect example. He was just promoted to the president of hockey ops for New Jersey, who, by the way, an 11-game win streak.
Rolling.
Exactly. So Doug, we always talk about the fix-it line in St. Louis, like the Ryan O'Reillys and the Braden Shans. Like, you put them on there and you fix the forwards and you get offense going. Doug Armstrong might be Mr. Fix-It for front office, because a lot of people want to work with him for how much success he has had for St. Louis. Curb says this all the time. People don't. The last time the Blues had a draft pick where they took a forward in the top 10 overall picks, do you know who it is?
I couldn't.
Rod Brind'Amour.
Oh, my gosh.
Rod Brind'Amour.
What was that, 84, 85, 86, somewhere around there?
It was way before my time.
Wow.
That was the last time they selected a forward top 10 in a draft. They've selected Pietrangelo. They've selected defensemen in the past. But think about that. Like, you have always had success in St. Louis. So if you're Doug Armstrong, if I'm a young person wanting to get involved in front office, I want to work for St. Louis, because St. Louis has a recipe for success. And there are other teams that have that also. Like Tampa Bay right now, recipe for success. I also want to work for Steve Yzerman for what he has been able to accomplish with 2 separate teams. But Doug Armstrong's at the top of that list.
Hey, we'll get back to the Last Minute Blues podcast in just a second, but want to thank one of our sponsors of the Last Minute Blues podcast, and that is Dr. James Maxwell and Crestwood Dental Group. I'm actually taking my kiddos to see Dr. Maxwell on Monday afternoon, but it's really great knowing that the kids don't dread going to the dentist office. It's really great going in there knowing that Dr. Maxwell is always learning the latest and greatest in dental technology. So he's going to do everything that he can to make that experience enjoyable and easy for you. I grew up with this nasty fear of going to the dentist. I mean, like, it was based and rooted in absolute fear. And you know what? I don't have to worry about my kids growing up with that exact same thing. They know that it's just a part of something that they've got to do, and they're going to do it. And Dr. Maxwell and his team are going to take great care of your family just like they do ours. Find out more about Crestwood Dental Group over there in Sunset Hills by giving them a ring at 314-463-5655. That's 314-463-5655. It's Crestwood Dental Group, one of the proud sponsors of the Last Minute Blues podcast. So, Alex, this team, I think we came out of the box, won, 3-4 in a row?
3 in a row.
Lost 8.
8 in a row.
And now have won 5.
And tied a NHL record for most consecutive wins after an 8-game losing streak.
So
if they win this one against Anaheim Saturday night, they'll set a NHL record.
So, okay. That said, in trying to get a handle on these guys, I still firmly believe that this is a very good team. But it just, I'm not sure what do you make of this?
You and I are on the same page right now. I watch this team night in and night out. I do pre and post for them, and I say, I don't know how I feel about this. Last season, I felt that was a damn good team. And I said, they got to get their goaltending figured out. Billy Husso steps in. You're like, you know what? They can win. They can win. And people would argue, but I will go to my grave thinking that Binnington doesn't get ran into. They win that series against Colorado. They go to the Stanley Cup against Tampa, and who knows what happens. Yeah. This season, you're getting phenomenal goaltending, but you're turning the puck over a lot. But I also feel like when you look at it, and this goes back to our Twitter conversation, people hear this and they say, you're making excuses for Ario. You got to take into consideration what they went through in the early portion of the season in terms of they lost Buchnevich after Game 1, Brandon Saad after Game 3. Those are 2 very impactful players in your top 6. We've seen that now. Yep. Then you have that weird start to the season where you only play like 4 games in a matter of 2.5 weeks, and then you start playing 4 games in 7 days. So that messes with some things. I think this is a very good team compared to what they were last year. I think that the offense is going to be there every single night, regardless if people look at it and say, well, they only score 1 or 2 goals. Defense concerns me because they're still turning the puck over. I'm not just talking about the defenseman. I'm talking about the 5-man unit.
Yep.
Here's why I believe this team is still going to be successful this year and could do what they did last season. Goaltending.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have goaltending, you will not have success in the NHL. But if you have goaltending, it will clean up the mistakes that your team is making in front of you. Now, don't make the mistakes that you made against Montreal, LA, and the Islanders, given those backdoor tap-ins, because no goalie's making those saves. But Vegas is a perfect example. You didn't play well in the third period, and Binnington stood on his head for you. Colorado, another perfect example. You made too many mental mistakes in terms of taking penalties, and you had to deal with the 6-on-3. Goaltender stood on his head for you. And then the other night, for that victory to continue the win streak, Thomas Greiss stands on his head for you in the Washington Capitals game, despite your team playing very poorly. So I think this team is still a little mentally fragile. Mike Van Ryn said that post-game the other night. I think they're still a mentally fragile team when things go poorly. But if you've got Jordan Binnington playing this way, I don't think this team is a miss the playoff type of team.
I have always, and I completely understand that I am a homer.
Same, buddy.
So I understand that what I'm about to say, it comes from a homer, but I'm very fascinated by kind of the national look on Jordan Binnington.
Yeah.
It is not as favorable as I had kind of thought it was. Listen, I don't think he's the second coming of Dominic Hasek or Patrick Waugh or any of those types of things, but we have seen him be an absolutely unbelievable goaltender, save us games from time to time. We had not had that in a really long time, but correct me if I'm wrong, he is kind of viewed on the national stages. He's all right.
Yeah. Well, and if people followed along on social media with me, Greg Wyshynski at ESPN, he kind of fired back at one of the tweets that I had. And look, I love Greg Wyshynski.
He's great.
Phenomenal at what he does, and he's open to his opinion. Here's what I think the national stage views Jordan Binnington as. He's too inconsistent, and that's what Greg Wyshynski kind of alluded to in his tweets with me. And they're not wrong. Like 2020 bubble season, not a good Jordan Binnington. He'd tell you that. Last season, an inconsistent Jordan Binnington. But 2019-2020 pre-pandemic, Binnington was one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League. He was 30-13-5, I think, at the end of the season. He was a
machine.
Yeah. Stanley Cup championship, best goaltender in the NHL. And then this season, Jordan Binnington has been one of the best goalies in the NHL. And I don't care what people say, well, don't look at his save percentage. That was my tweet. If you take out that Montreal, LA Kings and Islanders game, and I know you can't do that, but anybody who watched that game knows that Patrick Waugh and Marty Brodeur could have been tied together with a rope in between the pipes, and they're not stopping those goals.
Yeah, man.
Because the team just let them backdoor tap-ins, deflections.
Dude, he was all alone.
Everywhere. And David Alexander, the goaltending coach, he told Joey this on our pregame a couple of nights ago. He said that Jordan Binnington and Alexander's going to be a little bit more critical than we will. Jordan Binnington has given up 5 goals this season that he'd probably tell you he'd want back. 5 goals, Donnie.
Yeah, that's nothing.
All season long.
Yeah.
If you take out those 3 games, he would have top 3 save percentage in the National Hockey League. Jordan Binnington in the third period when his team is leading this season is 5-0 with a .947 save percentage.
Damn.
Jordan Binnington this season has been the MVP for this team. And if this continues the rest of the way, Jordan Binnington is going to have the numbers that you look at and say, wow, maybe we should start looking at him a little bit more. But it's going to be so hard for people to view that and forget about the bubble and forget about last season because he was inconsistent. And I would imagine if you're a goaltender, you got to have a long string of consistency before people can look at you and say, hey, that's a top goaltender in the NHL. But for me, I mean, let's look at his season right now. 2018-19, one of the greats. 2019-20, before the bubble and the pause, phenomenal.
Yeah.
Bubble struggles, last year struggles, this year has been great. I mean, that's a pretty good, consistent track record for Jordan Binnington.
It just almost seems like the dude's going to have to win another cup to like sort of get any sort of legitimacy with some of these guys.
And the other reason I think that people don't like Jordan Binnington, and this is just me.
His personality?
His personality. And you know what? I hate that people don't like that about him because I want my... Anson Carter, NHL TNT broadcaster and former NHLer, he was on our show a couple of days ago, and he said, I want my goaltender to have a bit of an attitude. Like, people don't like when Jordan Binnington gets angry, when he gives up bad goals and gets yanked and he flings his sticks at guys' faces. I want my goaltender pissed off that he didn't play well or his team left him out to dry, because that attitude is just going to drive him even further. But I think on the national stage, I think they view Jordan Binnington as a quote-unquote punk, which, look, fine, whatever you want to view it as, but Jordan Binnington has not been, and will not be, from personality purposes. Just talk to the guy for a little bit. Right. He's not a punk. He's actually one of the good guys to talk to and be around. But that's how he plays. However you find your fire, that's all that we care about. There have been plenty of guys in the NHL who play that way that aren't goaltenders that people love. PK Subban was that way.
Yeah.
Jordan Binnington has fire. I say let the guy use the fire because sometimes it sparks his teammates.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also, too, I mean, you always, for other teams, you got to have guys you don't like.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if you're on the other team and you see Jordan Binnington and you see his press stuff, you're like, oh, yeah, I don't like that guy. But that's fine. He's ours. You don't have to like him.
Hate him all you want.
I don't care. Hey, that brings me to something here real quick. You're not going to have an answer for this. I don't have an answer for this. I do not understand the consistency in which people in the Chicago media take pot shots at St. Louis. Scott Darling being one, and then a couple of years ago we had Anthony Rizzo with the Cubs. I do not understand this. Listen, I don't like Chicago sports teams. All right?
Plain and simple.
No big surprise there, okay? Right. But like, I don't try to shoot down every bad thing about Chicago that I can. I love Chicago. I love the pizza. It's an amazing place to go. And I just don't understand this desire by the Chicago sports fan to just always just look for something about St. Louis to crap on. I think it's because our sports teams have now caught up and maybe surpassed them. Yeah. And maybe that is kind of what's going on in there. But I hate it so much. And then you've got Scott Darling, who I didn't even remember his name, chirping on St. Louis. I hate it. And I hate him.
Scott Darling. I don't know. Do people know this? Do you know this? Scott Darling is still getting paid by an NHL team. Like, let's do a fun trivia. Who do you think is still paying Scott Darling right now?
I mean, is it the Hawks?
No, it's the Florida Panthers. He got traded he signed with Carolina that contract after he was so good in Chicago. And look, you can't deny how good he was that year with Chicago. He was great. He signs his contract with Carolina. He gets his no-trade clause, which I'm not sure if he got a no-trade clause with Carolina. But regardless, he played a year and a half, was not good. They basically said, we need you to go away. They paid him to go away, and then they traded his contract that they are paying for him to go away to another team to pay for that contract because they didn't want to pay for it. Like, that's how it was. And Joey said it best on our broadcast the other night. He said, it's very humbling when you're an NHL forward or an NHL player and you get paid to not play in the league. And to go out on a stage like that and just start running your mouth about a city makes absolutely zero sense to me. I actually didn't mind what the Chicago Cubs player said when they said it because you're stirring up rivalry. Mm-hmm. And what I think it was Chris Bryant or Anthony Rizzo.
Yeah, I think it might have been Chris Bryant. Yeah.
What he said was, I don't like St. Louis because it's a boring place. That's fine. That's your opinion. I don't want to go to West Virginia because I think it's a boring place. Right. But you don't see me shooting. West Virginia is the worst place in the country.
Right.
I was fine with what Chris Bryant said because, like, hey, rivalry. Now when the Cubs and the Cardinals play, everyone's going to be talking about it.
Yeah.
It's one thing to to say that a city is boring and you don't like playing there, to I think St. Louis is the worst city in the country. Like, what are you trying to accomplish right now, Scott Darling? I have no idea. My tinfoil Ferrario theory with this, Donnie, is Scott Darling wants to be relevant again.
Yeah.
Scott, I don't know if he's done pre and post before with the television in Chicago. I don't know if he's done anything on air before. I do know that he's trying to be a successful stand-up comedian.
I read that as well.
He might need to rework his skit a little bit here if that's his stand-up act, but My tinfoil on that is Scott Darling wanted to be relevant again in Chicago, and what's the way to make yourself relevant in a city? You start ishing on the other city. But again, to say that you never wanted to play in St. Louis is fine. To say that you didn't like playing in St. Louis is fine. But don't open your mouth and say, I think St. Louis is the worst city in the country. I'm pretty sure we can come up with worse cities than St. Louis, buddy. So how about we pump the brakes here? And Kelly Chase had the best response to him on Twitter. Kelly Chase just said, hey, because, he said, I made sure that my no-trade list, the top of that was St. Louis. Kelly Chase was like, hey, buddy, we have scouts in St. Louis that know about you. You would have never been on their list, so don't worry about your no-trade list.
Thank you, Chaser. Thank you.
Chaser.
What did you think of the reverse retros? You like them?
Yes.
Not
really.
Yeah.
But I'm the guy that likes the clown jerseys. Like, I'm the guy that liked the reverse retros last year with the red because that was my era. There are people who probably saw the first St. Louis Blues when they were those blue retro jerseys and loved them. I don't like yellow.
Yeah.
I don't like yellow for the Blues. Like, it was a little bright. I still think they did it best. Like, I still think the Blues used the logo correctly, used the jerseys with that retro style because the Winter Classics are what everyone used to love, and that one is what they look like.
Yeah.
If they would have done the neon blue and then had more yellow, I probably would have loved it. But again, I understand the premise of it. It's the reverse retro.
And then Braden Shen, I think, kind of sort of dodged around the question last night as to whether he liked them or not, because I thought he said that they look like Predator jerseys, which obviously is something that he's not a fan of.
I don't like those.
So I'm betting that Shen are probably not on board, not liking them.
At least they weren't mustard Nashville jerseys. Like, Nashville's like that mustard color that you find in your fridge that's been 2 years old and you squirt it on the hot dog. You're like, guess I'm not eating that today. That's what Nashville's jerseys look like. But at least this one's like, oh, okay. It's funny, too, because the players were asked about those clown jerseys, and they all found ways to veer around it when you'd ask them the question. But you could see in their eyes, like, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's something different,
pretty
all right.
cool.
All right. Alex, thank you so much for your time, man. We appreciate
Donnie,
it so
I love
much.
These, man. Anytime you could come on or ask me to come on with this, I will. And this is the first time I've been on since Jeff passed away. And the last time I was on with you was with Jeff. I loved you two. You two were my favorite dynamic duo for the hockey team.
Thanks, man.
Jeff is so much missed. And every time I listen to this podcast with you and Jamie, I'm thinking about him. So love you, Jeff Burton. Love you, Donnie. Anytime you need me on, buddy, I'm here for you.
That is Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN. It is the Last Minute Blues podcast for Jamie Rivers, Alex Ferrario, Jeff Burton. I'm Donnie Fandango. As always, let's go Blues.
The Last Minute Blues Podcast. Hear more at 1057thepoint.com. Powered by Together Credit Union. Empowering you to achieve your financial goals.